the land has been part of the story for here today. It has never been separate entities for me because I took all of my history, such as it is, through the oral tradition and through my house at home and the stories that I gathered as I went along. So some of that will be part of what this is. Bawailan Farchiriv Guji and Arwahahas. Welcome to South Armagh, the magical, mythical valleys and hills of Gullion. It carries a heritage. Mountains give one a certain standard which governs the whole outlook. They take a grip on the heart as one grows and always leave one with what the people say, a gra for it forever. There is no doubt that this is a special place. Surrounded by the presence of Slieve Gullion, nurtured by the legend and stories, secure in a vibrant cultural identity which defines our sense of place, a heritage of Irish chieftains, Gaelic bards, music, poetry and stories. And you couldn't come and sit where Slieve Gullion looks down on you and not talk about Michael J. Murphy. And we've heard quotes from Patrick when he spoke about the pilgrimage to the mountain. Maud Gonne came to the mountain. Maud Gonne wrote to Michael J. Murphy, just so we get a woman in here. Maud Gonne wrote to Michael J. Murphy that she came here and the mountain sang to her and she could almost write down the tune. So this mountain has always had that quality to it. And nobody, I suppose, recognised it locally at the same level as Michael J. Murphy. So his poem, his own poem, that talks about the foundation of the mountain, about its brood, which is the ring of hills that surround it, which were magma pools formed by the volcanic action of it that came to the top. And how beautifully in poetry, and there is a quote from Mary Oliver, who's an American poet, and it's something that we used at the beginning of Antubber, that art, poetry is one of the ancient art forms. And like all art forms, it comes from the land. It comes from the landscape. So dome of Slieve Gullion and of your brood, my soul is a part in your rock heather heart, slave to your mood. Mystical beauty breathes on your brow, sun-setting beams lull me to dreams far from my plough. Wild inspiration flees unexpressed, through tinted sun-track, ancient mist-wool cap storing my breast. Mountain of mystery, of Finn the brave, of Saint Scholar Gael, of legend and tale, I am your slave. It just says everything that you would need to say about Slieve Gullion and about his love of it. And those words that I used in the opening piece, where mountains give you a gra for it forever, that's part of Michael J.'s wording. So poetry can pare the words down to its very minimum to give you a message. But then what about poetic prose? What about the piece of writing that lifts your heart and that brings your imagination out and puts a richness into the very word of itself? This is part of A Mountain Mass by Michael J. It's taken from one of his Mountainese books, Poetic Prose by the master storyteller Michael J. Murphy. A Midnight Mass. It was very quiet out here on the road in the hills. A quiet uninfluenced by the mystery of the night, with stars tracing the infinite canopy of the sky and ancient Slieve Gullion in the north. Black, reticent, mysterious, converging with space, giving benediction to that quiet. Before me, on an arm of the mountain itself, rose the night-darkened church of St. Patrick's Drumantee. It was Christmas Eve. I could hear human voices, but could not see anyone. All over the valley and on the hills, candles burned in every window. Slieve Gullion watched with hidden eyes
that made themselves felt the personality of the mountain, if that mountain could speak. It would tell of hidden mass rocks up among the boulder and heather, where perhaps Mass had been celebrated even on Christmas Eve. A light appears among the heather on the mountain. It is a lanthorn or hurricane lamp, borne by a party coming in single file along an ancient path. Heather, brushing their boots, springs from ground alive with history. Women in black shawls flit by, the shawls cowl-like drawn across their face. It is within minutes of midnight. I go to midnight Mass in this chapel in the hills of the north.
Isn't it beautiful words of the mountain and of people coming off the mountain and of a way of life and of a time of life that he just captured in a way that you couldn't but want to listen to him. And there is a modern poet who is Q Murphy from the Slea, and one of Q's poems, I think for me, says all that literature could say about this land that is South Armagh and of the love of this land of South Armagh by its people. It's called The Melody Lingers. There is a song in these hills and fields and hunchback roads. Each man walks down his verse, strikes his chord. Each one that I have known sang himself till death. The notes of their lullaby still linger after sleep. The hills and leaping slopes are staff, each rock and stiffened field a clef. I hum them as I pass. Pulsing through their score, I fill their voices with my steps. We walk in the feet of those who walk before them. I was on Anamar Court Cairn yesterday with a group of people on a tour, most of them from well outside the South Armagh area, with immense pride to stand where somebody stood 6,000 years ago to build a cairn, and to know that we are in that way connected to it. We have an absolutely wonderful, wonderful area. This is Lisleitrim. This is a three-ringed fort outside Cullyhanna. Three-ring forts are very rare. It overlooks Lisleitrim Loch with an extremely large crannog, which I surely would say that in some way it was a royal site. And Lisleitrim can take us many places if you follow my mind, and that can sometimes take you to very dangerous places. But I'm going to take you to Australia from Lisleitrim. I'm going to take you to Ned Kelly, the bushranger. I'm sure everyone has heard some of the stories of Ned Kelly. You best come out, Ned Kelly. You done the government wrong, for you held up the coaches that brought the gold along. Go tell your boss, said Kelly, who let the rich go free, that your bloody rich man's government will never govern me. And the man that walked alongside Ned Kelly as he went to his hanging was Father Tom Donaghy from Lisleitrim. What better man to walk alongside him and to listen to, will you tell your bloody rich man's government, you'll never govern me. This piece of music, so music and poetry and landscape all coming together. This piece of music is by Molly McAlinden. Molly McAlinden, not talked about as often as her father, Patrick McAlinden. Patrick McAlinden was a poet and a harpist. He's buried in Creggan Graveyard. His grave not known, but there's a plaque to him. Padre McAlinden ran the poetry school at Killinhill, Knockeen McConcha, and Pedro O'Dornan wrote afterwards, Knockeen McConcha, on the green hill of Cain, son of Concha. But Molly McAlinden, not as well known. This piece of her poem, The Greenwoods of Trua, is a love poem that was written for her brother to give to the girl that he had fallen in love with. But there is a beautiful, beautiful air to this that has been revived, and you're going to hear the tap group later on. But this has been revived very much by the young musicians of South Armagh. I can't tell you how thrilling it is. We stood at the side waiting to go up to Corless Fort one day after walking from Anamar Courtyard. Wet evening, and we had roped the field off so that they weren't tramping all over the women's field, that they were going in a single file up onto the fort. And there were two wee ones standing beside me waiting to go on up. And I said to them, will you sing us a song? And the two of them sang Lyrical and Craggin. 8 and 9-year-olds, as Gaeilge. I put it up that night on Twitter and said, 2 8 and 9-year-olds singing the poetry of Art McCooey from the 1700s in a Guthrie gap. And I had more people coming back to ask me what was a Guthrie gap than they had. But isn't that wonderful? Isn't that absolutely and totally wonderful that children from this area are singing as Gaeilge the poetry of this area with absolute and total abandonment and pride, and travelling over Ireland and taking competitions by storm. This is The Greenwoods of Trua by Molly McAlinden. This won second prize for Stephen O'Neill, and there has been a piece on the television all week about the assembly rooms in Belfast and the need to preserve and do something with them. The assembly rooms were the place where Henry Joy McCracken and the 1798 men were convicted. But in 1792, it was the place that hosted Bunting's Harp Festival. And this won second prize for Stephen O'Neill from Tyrone, playing the music of Molly McAlinden from Lisleitrim in South Armagh. So just for time's sake. So when we talk about literature, do we only look in books for our literature? Do we take literature as part of the oral tradition? Do we recognise its value in the same way as we recognise literature? Because surely we should, because where would we have the stories of Finn or of any of those stories had they not been carried in the oral tradition before it was time to write them down? So we need to look at how and where we recognise things that are important to us, even as part of literature. And there is where we look at our townland names, at our places. We sat up in 1972 and we allowed somebody in an office to put a red pen through 800 years of our history. And our townland names carry with them all of the things that have been talked about here as regards the story of A.E. Russell. They carry the mythology, they carry the history, they carry the landscape, they carry the sense of where you are, all of them. And this is only taken a small selection of them because I'm moving on from Lisleitrim. Anywhere you have Lis or Rath in your townland name, you have the certainty that you had an Iron Age people living in that area. So we can't just view literature and history as separate identities. We have to look into an overall holistic way. And surely that's what A.E. Russell was doing. If he was talking about that movement to bring people back and force and move the Irish culture back up to itself, this is what we need to be doing. We need to be going back and recognising the things that we have lost and looking to bring them back. So I go into the primary schools. First thing you ask a child when you meet them for the first time is, what's your name? And I will bet you £100 the next thing you say to them is where you live. We are sitting in the townland of Mafoner, the Plain of the Beans. It's the only flat bit of land in Molaí. Everything else rises up. Just look at the roads when you go out of it. Everything else goes up. This is our wee flat plain. That's why it's called Mafoner. And you move down this road and you move into Carrickildreen, the rock of the blackthorn tree. John Hewitt, a planter, said, the names of a race show on the heart of the tongue, the roll on the hill, on the tongue like the lilt of a song. Where do you live? I live in Carrickildreen, the rock of the blackthorn tree. The government tells them they live in the Bog Road. Where do you live? I live in the Bog Road. Where do you live? I live in Carrickildreen. Just the sound of what, like Michael Jay's poetic prose, the lift that gives you by the very sound of how that is. So these are our townland names that all have with them the knowledge that they are. And if you do come back and you want to go, please go and see Corliss Fort. Corliss Fort is the most beautiful ring fort, perfectly intact, small enough that it has never been farmed out. Lisleitrim is a large fort, but it has grown in, so you only get that sense of it because I have a drone footage. Corliss is magic, absolute magic. You can't do poetry or literature from this area unless you do Cregan. Because Cregan is extra special. Cregan is the burial site of the last of the Gaelic poets of South East Ulster. I've already talked about Padraig McAlinden, Art McCooey, I suppose the best known of them, Peadar O'Dornian of the same time frame. Peadar O'Dornian buried just outside Forkhill here in Orney Graveyard. But in 1972, and we have to recognise that everyone doesn't start from the same place. In 1972, Tom Fee, who became Cardinal Tomás Fee, translated the poetry of Art McCooey as Gaeilge into Asperla. And not everyone, and Tom Fee speaks very well on one of the pieces that he had done of how his father was not a native speaker and how he had always aspired to be a native speaker. And he made sure that his two sons went to the Gaeltacht so that they became native speakers. Now, Tom Fee's father was a principal in a school. So every family hadn't the facility of doing that or of giving their young people Irish. So for people who grew up without the Irish language, the translation of those poems handed back to me, who didn't have Irish, they handed back to me the only piece I was missing. Because I had the history, I had the mythology, but what I didn't have, and what South Armagh had, when we now have a revival of young people and a revival of the language, it had held tight every other single part, so that when the language came back, everything could move forward together. Now, that was lucky. My father used to look at Slieve Gullion and look around us in a poor establishment, I can tell you, in Tulloch and O'Donnell, and he'd say, you're a blessed and lucky people, look where you were born. And my mother, with much more sensitivities and wit, would say, now that'll feed you all at the weekend. And both of them were right. Both of them were right. There had to be a mixture of both. But that sense of pride and of a sense of who you are and a sense of how you fit into the place you're in, all lead you to have a better respect for yourself, and I think for other people's cultures also. If you have been given that as a measure of yourself, then other people's cultures are not a threat. How would they be? How would they be? Nobody could fundamentally, and dare they try, could change me. You know, and it's not about not being unmovable. It's about recognizing that knowing something more about somebody else only helps you. You know, it doesn't make sense to not view it in that way. So Art McCooey was born almost 100 years after the Gaelic chieftains had left South Armagh. The O'Neill land was confiscated in the Cromwellian confiscation of 1665. Art McCooey was not born until 1738. And yet his whole focus was looking back, looking at the loss of what those Gaelic chieftains meant to this area, the loss of the culture, the loss of the identity. And I suppose his most famous poem, Lyrical and Cregan, were reputedly written within the vault of the O'Neills, because the O'Neill vault had been inside their original church. And when it became a Reformation site and the new church was built, it was built in a different direction, which meant the vault was within the graveyard and no longer within the confines of a church. And at McCooey's time, the vault hadn't been completely closed off. And he sat among the bones of the O'Neills to write Lyrical and Cregan. It's a Naisling poem. So it's a conversation piece between himself and a fairy woman. And she's telling him to leave because there is nothing left for him here in the area, because the Gaelic chieftains have gone. On the clay of Cregan graveyard, I slept all night in woe. With rise of morn, a maiden came and kissed me bending low. Her cheeks had the blush of beauty, her tresses the golden sheen. 'Twas the world's delight to gaze on the face of that fairy queen. And she tells him to leave. She has a better place for him. There is nothing for him here when the O'Neills have gone. And he says, my anguish, my woe, we've lost them. The gales of our true Tyrone. And the heirs to the fews unhonoured sleeps under the cold grey stone. Brave branches of Niall Frassic, whose delights were the lays of old, whose hearts give the poets welcome, whose hands give the poets gold. But she says he must leave. He must leave because his language has gone and there will be nothing. And he says, one thing I ask you only, one promise, O Queen Divine, and I will follow faithful, I'll follow each step of thine. If I should die in some far-off land, in my wanderings east or west, in the fragrant clay of Cregan, let my weary heart have rest. Now, he didn't confine himself. He didn't confine himself either to, I'll just stop that. He didn't confine himself to the Gaelic poets, although most of the Gaelic chieftains, most of it was. He had a go at Father Quinn's sister. Father Quinn was also from the townland of Lisleitrim. Lisleitrim was a very important townland, but Father Quinn was from the townland of Lisleitrim, a big man's man, not a lot of time for the poor peasant. And he was guarded well at the front door by his sister, Mary Quinn. So McCooey had not been well received by Mary Quinn, and he had written a poem about her. All the children around are in tatters for dress, and the people can't pay the funeral cess. Yarn and cloth have run out, and the seed has gone thin, and there's butter for no one but blind Mary Quinn. A handsome young fella is not what would please her, who'd give her a kiss and maybe would squeeze her. But a bloke with a present of spuds for the bin, 'tis he'd drink the punch with blind Mary Quinn. McCooey the poet, she reckoned unable to sit with the gentry or sup at their table. Instead, in the pantry, left perched on his legs, he drank all his buttermilk down to the dregs. He blamed Father Quinn for having him excommunicated over the poem. He was excommunicated. He was chased with bell and candle. He was read out from the pulpit by Father Quinn, and he was forced to leave the Cregan area and go to Howth. And all his time at Howth, looking back to South Armagh, which he eventually came back to. So McCooey's is a beautiful story, but what closed the circle, because when the O'Neill land was taken in the Cromwellian confiscation, some of them did what the O'Neill had done in front of them with the flight of the Earls. They went to the continent. Some of them, because they had been given title to the land, took their quarter acreages and went to Connacht, to Hell or Connacht. They went to Behola in County Mayo. And some of them kept their head down and stayed quietly in South Armagh to see how the thing would roll out. But in 1973, for the launching of the finding of the O'Neill vault, Conchita O'Neill came from Seville, the direct descendants of the O'Neill of the Fews, and she stood on the vault of her people and she recited McCooey's poetry, and the circle had closed and the O'Neill had come home. I want to bring you to Antubber. Antubber was a garden centre just outside Silverbridge, and the girls who owned it had wanted to make a change in their life. They left a thriving business behind to open what is now known as a wellness centre. So Maggie's dream, Maggie was the horticulturist, and Maggie's dream was that she would plant trees. And she has planted 14,000 native Irish trees from the back of her yard up the side of Cargan Hill. And my dream was Mary Oliver's quote that poetry is one of the ancient arts, and those arts are part of the landscape. I listened to my daddy talk of walking behind my granda in 1930. So he was a 14-year-old boy, and he was lifting corn as the old man swung the side. And as he swung the side, 20 years after the buying in of the land was such a focus. But 20 years after the buying in of the land, as he swung the side and cut the corn, he recited Fanny Parnell's poems. And by the God who made us all, the landlord and the serf, rise up today and vow to claim your own green Irish turf. Rise up and plant your feet as men when now you cower as slaves, and make the harvest fields your own and make of them your graves. And that poetry wasn't confined to a book in the house. That poetry was part of his life as he went about his work. So my dream was we would put poetry on the mountain. And between the two of us, we have managed to do that. The trees are now in their 5th year of growth. When they're 20 years, when they are a forest, they will be absolutely magnificent. But as they are now, through them, there are heritage trails with signs that tell you about the trees that you're looking at. And there are 4 poetry trails. So you can press a sign and you can hear the Gaelic poetry of South Armagh, the work of Art McCooey, the work of Peadar O'Dornan, as Gaeilge agus as Berla. You can go to the one that's listed Land and Space. You can hear the work of Patrick Kavanagh. My black hills have never seen the sunrise. Eternally they will look towards Armagh. Lot's wife would not be salt if she had been as incurious as my black hills, who gladden when white Leighton's Glasdrummoch Chapel. You hear it on the side of the mountain. You hear the beautiful, beautiful poem. We saw Lady Gregory. We saw the tree. Is it not a shame that all we have of Lady Gregory is a tree with W.B. Yeats and A. Russell's name on it, that we don't have something about Lady Gregory? You can hear Dún Logue, the most beautiful love poem ever written from the 8th century, wonderfully translated by Lady Gregory on the side of Cargan Hill. You have taken the east from me, you have taken the west from me. It is absolute and total magic. So this, just last week, the Sullivan family were home. They are the Obidji tribe from America. We took them to Antubber. They planted what was for us and them, and we talked it over, the right tree to plant. They planted the hawthorn. They planted the fairy thorn, the tree that is the symbol of the outer and the inner world, the spirit world that works for me and works for them. And this is them do their prayer. Now, isn't that a meeting of spirits? On the side of Cargan Mountain, from one group of people to another group of people. You know, this is how we reach out to cultures. Michael J. Murphy recognised women at a time when nobody recognised women, when there was no value put on the work that rural women were doing. I grew up, I was born in 1954. The women that I knew ran the entire community. They were the economic managers of money that they never called their own. They saw everything right. But Michael J. recognised them. This is called part of Women in the Fields at Spring. She's the woman who wielded her grape of 4 steel prongs to spread dung in the drills, who bent once at every yard of the same drill to drop seed potatoes from the bag briskin tied around her waist, and waited according to the length of the drill with maybe 3 stone each time. She was the woman who came to the head rig with dinner for the field and stayed to work. Sometimes she owned the field. Sometimes she was there as a neighbour to give a hand, unbidden except by the edict of communal instinct. And sometimes, like myself, she was working for wages. Narrow-minded old labourers used to advise us, never work for a woman. A woman never knows what's in a day's work. It often seemed to be true, till you remembered her in early spring with pigs, calves and cattle and new broods of swarming chickens around her feet on top of her housework. And then she found time to cut the seed. In the harsh air of March, her eyes tired and strained, her limbs stiff and cold, cutting each potato into the heart of her hand with skill and knowledge, expertly guiding the blade. Always it was the women who dropped the seed. They have the back for it, the man said evasively. But it was a belief then. You remember her at the job, her fingers all false nails, the skin and cuticle at the nail end slit and curled back and pained, and often bled from quick contact of placing each cut seed firmly in the dry manure of stable, byre and pigsty. Such is the woman as I remember her. Always valiant, rarely complaining, often the backbones and brain of man on the land, guardian and guide of the tillage field. Never worked for a woman. She doesn't know what's in a day's work. Maybe the soured old men were right. She often did not know. She was too used to the task of having to put 2 and 3 days' work into one herself. Beauty never boiled the pot, nor grumbling either, nor for that matter turned a sod of earth or dropped a seed pretty. Michael J's tribute to women. So, just 2 last minutes. How do you translate a piece of poetry into what gives you a modern piece of work that you could place in front of a child and open their eyes to something new? This is a poem written in 1939 by a man from Kernally who was in London, writing it to his friend, and his friend was getting home, leaving London because conscription was going to come in, as most of the Irish men did. So his friend was going home, and the man who wrote it was not in a position to go home. And he wrote it looking at all of the things he knew his friend would see when he arrived home. So it belongs to me, it belongs to my family. It was in my house. We took it out. We filmed in Kernally the places that he was talking about. Láithín McCann put an air to it, and this is Kernally. This is a poem written in 1939 before the outbreak of the Second World War, and this is the heartbreak of a man who's not going home.
You are heading for Kernally, John, my soul with envy filled. For the youth that's strong within you will be bounding o'er the hills. You will stand on crag and Howard what a sight will then unfold. With your eyes full of the world, just as the ancient poets told. Cuchulainn's noble mountain will lie purple in the sun, and lesser mounts will seaward slope in arc to Dalganstone, as if to reach to Clogherhead and to guard the sleeping town. As if, and with God's benching that, the dapple skies look down. Wander out the winding valley round by Tavies and McShins, where homes amid the heather, led away by winding linn, down by reels and Campbell's bog holes, to the savage Craigadil, where the rain gives voice to lilting from the streamlet round the mill. Oh, the hills above Carnally, they come surging through my dreams. I see Carnally's barren rocks, its rushes and its streams, and I pray that those who live there from all sorrow have relief. And I pray that those who die there will all rest in God's great peace.
Thank you very much.